So, Agi Haines, you're an artist at Brave New World. What's your artwork?
So I make sculptures or a lot of physical work about the sort of future of the body and how nascent biomedical and healthcare technologies can affect the form of the body.
And like the form of the body, grow an extra pair of hands or...
Yeah, exactly.
That kind of things?
I suppose I'm more interested in like anatomical structure rather than sort of cellular changes, even though they do take different shapes. But I'm quite interested in quite literally, cutting things and moving them about, and how surgery has really affected how we've formed the body in the past. Yeah. Like
plastic surgery, what kind of influence that has on our concept of beauty, or do you mean something else?
Yeah, I suppose more for functional reasons. So I may be thinking more about how there might be things like environmental changes that could impact our sort of evolution, but not in terms of us changing, because evolution takes millions and millions of years, but we can actually do things sort of surgically that could push our evolution forward in like design ways. So, for example, I made a series of sculptures of babies that I'll be talking about tomorrow, and one of them has a high head surface area, so it's got flaps on its head. So as the planet's getting hotter with global warming, it might be able to get rid of heat easier. So these are things that I'm trying to see if parents might be interested in modifying their child, if it might help them later in life or not. And some of them are sort of nearer to decisions that you might be likely to make, so for example for health reasons, and then some are more for like social mobility, which people seem to find a little bit more disturbing.
And can you give an example of the last category?
Yeah, so that one, in the same series of sculptures, there was, so this is a set of 5 babies with different modifications, and one of them has, you can stretch your skin, and one of them has large cheeks, so it can absorb more caffeine, so it might just be able to work loads and then earn a lot of money. So that one's almost like a little bit comedic in a funny way, but is something that when I've shown this to people, is something that people definitely wouldn't want to do. Whereas one of them is to help diabetic children, and that's actually something that I think people seem to be more accepting of.
Yeah, but of course it's a fine line between helping a person and upgrading a person, right?
Yeah, so I think in a way, I suppose the way I try and think about it is that there's sort of needs and then there's desires, and they're not totally different things, but obviously, if you have something wrong with you, you'll be more likely to opt for something like an invasive surgery if you really need it. But actually, Stephen Hawking's just brought out a paper about how people with more income will probably be more likely to opt for surgery because they'll have the money to support it. So there might be a divide between people who are more likely to modify themselves because they desire it, as opposed to the people who perhaps can't afford to do so.
Yeah, and what are the most stark reactions on your work? Do you also get threats, or not that much?
I've never had threats.
Okay,
no.
That's good.
Because I think people know I'm not proposing this stuff, so I'm not saying, look, this is a proposal for how we could change, but they're almost like prompts to say, is this societally acceptable? And in some ways, me making the work myself allows me to reflect on whether I find it acceptable or not. So in the past, I did a piece of work where I invited the audience to have discussions with me as we dissected one of my sculptures, and that allowed me to have a bit more of a to and fro about really whether people agree with this or not.
And so you do not like to call yourself a transhumanist, or do you like to call yourself a transhumanist?
I'm interested in transhumanism as a concept, but I don't think it's black and white. So I think there's a lot of Like, there's a bit of a scale there, and some things I'm probably quite pro, and then other things I might be a bit more, a little bit unsure about. And seeing as we've just had a few talks about the fears that come with, technology and war, if you combine sort of transhumanism with military purposes, that's something that really freaks me out. So I think I'm like, no.
Like a super soldier.
Yeah.
And I'm also interested, not so much in the content, or how does your creative process work? Like today you hear about the military, is that where your mind starts to wander and to think about new sculptures, etc.? Or how does it work?
Well, I'm quite lucky in that I have quite a good research network of people. So often the work will start with a collaboration or a conversation with someone from a different discipline. And I know at the moment sort of saying inter or multidisciplinary is quite a buzzword, but I like to think that the work is quite interdisciplinary, and that often I'll sort of do something like a residency where I get to visit somewhere where they're doing a certain type of research that might mean I can ask these questions to people who are really involved in it. So I think in a way that's always a nice place to start, but sometimes you just get ideas, don't you? Like opportunities like this where people are talking about things that are often so outside of your usual research can really trigger stuff.
Yeah, and last question, how important is the role, not from you as yourself, but from artists and makers, to make us as society aware of all the possibilities of technology?
Sorry,
how important is it that there are people making science fiction movies, but also science fiction art, etc.?
Do you think it's so important? I'm a proper advocate for sci-fi. No, I think it's really important to probe these kinds of questions, because in a way, you can then sort of think. It gives you a space to sort of think about what futures might be more desirable. And this comes from a very sort of speculative design stance. So Dunn and Raby, who were two designers who came up with the term, looked at possible and plausible and preferable futures. And in a way, things like speculative and critical design are ways to make those more tangible, to see whether they might be better or not, so whether you might prefer them or not. But I think science fiction is a really good way to do that, because I think it uses design strategies, like, there's a bit of comedy and there's a bit of horror, and I think it can actually sort of guide research, because every scientist that I've ever worked with often will quote films when they're describing their research to me, and it makes it much more easy to understand.
Because you don't have the same image in your head.
Yeah, there's like a cultural language that comes with it that people sort of get. Yeah. And I think it's a really good way to put across ideas that can be difficult to talk about otherwise. It's almost like a lubricant to talk about, gritty stuff. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. If people want to know more about your art, where can they look?
Yeah, you can go on my website, which is www.agihaines.com.
Agihaines.com.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.